So I want to talk for a minute in a very practical example about how you can use fictional literature to initiate scientific activities or initiate science inquiry. And so there's obviously a ton of books you could use depending on the grade level and what's appropriate. The example I have for you is Antlers Forever by Francis Bloxham. It's a book that we happened to find a few years ago on vacation. My kids were big fans of it, and in fact they're big enough fans that they wouldn't share their copy, so I had to get my own. Now, to avoid any copyright infringements, I'm going to give you kind of a short synopsis of what happens here and then how you can use that for a jumping off point. So the idea is that we start with Orville Anderson Tarkington Moose, is obviously a young moose here, who one day discovers that he has a loose antler. Quite concerning, because this is his antlers that he just spent most of the year growing. It's loose. He goes through some possibilities of what he can do to address the fact that it's loose, including eating things to get more vitamins, going and talking to an owl that gives him all sorts of advice. Predictably, they eventually completely come off, and he's greatly troubled by this. And then he runs into Big Moose, who says, obviously you don't know that moose shed their antlers every year, so the new ones can grow, and you wait until spring. Now, it's a cute story, lovely illustrations, that sort of thing. There's a handful of ways you can jump off in using this as a science inquiry point. So one is, as he is trying to solve his problem, even as a fictional moose, as he's trying to solve his problem, he's testing different hypotheses, right? So it's an example of how you can talk about, he has an idea of, I don't have enough of this vitamin, so I'm going to go eat a lot of this food that I think has the vitamin to see if that fixes the problem, right? That is a scientific approach. Seems very normal. He's a young moose, not what kids probably picture when they think of scientists, but it's a scientific process. So he's trying different things to fix his problems. There's also, as we go along the way, many questions that kids might ask. So in this story, it mentions that he has polished his antlers to keep them quite strong. So there's the chance to ask, well, do moose or deer or things like that actually polish their antlers? For students here in western Kansas, there's the chance to ask, wait, do deer do things the same way that moose do with antlers? Do deer antlers work the same way? They don't look the same. I can tell that from the book, and I've seen pictures of moose, and they don't look the same, but do they work the same? So that's a jumping off point. Questions about this vitamin that he goes after is vitamin M. So is there really a vitamin M, and what does that contribute to antlers? Does it? Then one of the things I like in particular about this book is the most obvious scientific question that's going to come up with is, well, why do moose lose their antlers? And the thing with that is that that's not going to be an easily Googled question, because the science there is not really perfectly settled. There's some ideas to just kind of fill you in on the background knowledge. A lot of it probably has to do with familial relationships in the cervid family, the deer family. So a common ancestor must have shed their antlers. It's kind of an odd thing to take place in nature because antlers are a very big thing that grows very quickly. A lot of energy is put into it. In some cases, like with the Irish elk, antlers can actually grow so big, attracting females, that they become harmful to keeping the animal alive. But it's not a perfectly settled question. So the goal when it comes to, if we have students go, okay, well, why do moose lose their antlers, or why do deer lose their antlers, the important thing isn't that they find the answer, because that's not necessarily out there. The important thing is that they come up with ideas and try to use information to support their ideas. So whether it can be things they observe, if you're fortunate enough that you can scrounge up some shed antlers, which, in western Kansas, ask your kids, some of them have some antlers laying around somewhere, or talk to your local game warden. They probably have some antlers off of deer that they've seized or cleaned up off of roadkill or things like that. So you can observe them. But the important thing isn't finding the answer, it's providing evidence and making a case for your answer. And so a book or an activity like this is a great jumping off point for scientific questions. It's a great way to integrate science into your literacy time. And so as you're designing your own activities, that's the goal. It doesn't have to be a book that necessarily feels like it ties as directly to science. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's one that's specifically about a fictional book about a kid involved in science, and maybe it's not, but it's just one that's going to generate questions. And that's what you want to think about as you go through the book and design the activity is, what are the types of questions students could maybe come up with from this book? What are things the book could maybe teach about science or demonstrations of people engaged in science, even if it doesn't look like that? And then what are activities or ways that they could find evidence to answer their question, or at least to create an explanation for their question? Again, the big focus in the next generation science standards is that we're focusing on the process of science. So what matters more is the engagement in the process of, I asked a question, I'm finding evidence and information to support my explanation, and then I'm going to make an argument for my explanation. That matters more than, is it definitely the reason that moose lose their antlers? So, as you're working on this activity, please reach out, ask questions. It's one that I hope, as you plan the activity, it's something that you could take and implement in your classrooms, whether during your student teaching or in your own classrooms. But the goal is that you're creating something that can actually be used.